Welcome to this rainy Saturday afternoon. This is a Suhr Hombre, and as I mentioned in a live stream last week, I'm going to try, whenever feasible, to occasionally feature an amp or some other music-related goodie that's not in for repair, but just to take a look at what makes it tick, how it's built, whether in fact it is a good product worthy of our consideration. Now, this Suhr Hombre is kind of the second one I've done in that vein. I did a Friedman Runt 20 2-3 weeks ago. Nothing was wrong with it. I just thought you guys would like to see it. So I'm doing the same thing for the Suhr Hombre, and as time and availability allows, I will continue to do this sporadically. Before I get started, John Suhr is a friendly acquaintance of mine, a friend of mine, an online friend. We don't hang out, but we're very cordial, and we've spoken quite a few times. And, he is an 800-pound gorilla in the industry, and I am not. So, there's that. And this amp is being sold by Eric Martin at Martin Music. And Eric and I have been friends for 30 plus years, and we have a business arrangement because I do the amps for his shop. So if you watch the rest of this review, and you think that either of those factors, that John Suhr is a friend of mine, that Eric Martin sells these, he's a friend of mine, if you think that makes me biased too favorably towards the amp, I cannot control that. I've not been inside one. I have no idea what my opinion of it is going to be. But just like the Friedman and like everything else, I call it the good, the bad, and the ugly. The Friedman did very well. That Swart Atomic Space Tone did very well. That Top Hat, can't remember, something Supreme Royale, whatever, was really, really great. So occasionally I get to say nice things about amps, and I'm hoping this will be one of those. Let's find out. Cosmetically, the amp obviously is referencing the 62 era Brown Panel Deluxe, non-reverb Deluxe. It just has 2 channels and vibrato, tremolo, whatever Leo is calling it that week. Let's see if what's inside matches what's outside. Something to point out that's not a major thing, but I'll point it out because I've pointed this kind of thing out in other amps recently, like the Friedman and that matchless Spitfire. The screws that hold the wood panel on the back, the rear panel, are machine screws that go into metal inserts. On this, like current production reissue fenders, and indeed like the 62, it has very nice sheet metal screws with the little cups that go straight into the wood. And indeed, that's what I have to get on the cabs I get from Mojo Tone for my own builds right now. So that's not a negative that it's that way, but it's not quite as nice as the ones which have the metal inserts. So I'm trying to be fair. Let's see here. We've got ARS tubes, 2 6v6 GTs, and 5 AR4. It's got a very good quality speaker cable, soldered, not quick connected, going to a Switchcraft plug with enough slack that it can be plugged and unplugged, but not so much that it becomes a problem. And it has a G12 V-type 70-watt speaker, which is not my favorite for this kind of amp, but it may sound fantastic. I have not really heard this except at the store at low volume yet. We'll put it through its paces later. It's got very good hardwood construction in here, multiple screws, many more screws holding the baffle to the cleats than you'd find in an actual 62, which would typically have 4. So construction-wise, it's built very solid. This is pine. It's fairly thick pine. It has good solid cleats. The trim work on the Telex is very nice. I don't feel a bunch of glue that was squeezing out that no one would see, but it's nice when little touches like that are done right. Nice crisp corners, including the inside corners. That can be tricky. Let me show you a neat thing, which is going to frustrate a lot of owners, but I think it's a good thing. The chassis is held in place by hex head screws rather than Phillips. So they are going to be hard to strip out, but a lot of people will not have the tool to do this. That said, most people have no business doing what I'm about to do. Most owners should never pull the chassis unless they're highly qualified. And if they're highly qualified, they probably have sets of metric and SAE hex wrenches like I do. Like the Friedman, like the Matchless, there's the standard washer beneath the dress washer so that the cup edge of the dress washer does not just chew through the Tolex. So that's a nice touch. Let me check one more thing, then I'll get the other 3 screws out and pull the chassis. On many, many amps, the hardware holding the handles is never tight. I would consider this tight, but not as tight as I would prefer. And that's not necessarily a fault from the factory, because this was made in Southern California, where it's always a certain temperature and humidity range, pretty much. And it's Memphis, Tennessee, and today is October 29th, and it is raining and humid, and gonna be in the 50s tonight. So wood expands and contracts. So these were not loose, but they're just not as tight as I can get them. If you own any amp which has screws, periodically, once or twice a year maybe, make sure that they're tight. It's not like a guitar headstock where if you over-tighten it, things will break. So while that wasn't bulletproof, again, this is actual pine, not plywood. It's not as stable as plywood, expanding, contracting. It did no harm to retighten those a bit more, but they weren't as tight as I would like them as the amp came into me. So whether you think that matters or not, I'm just trying to note everything good, bad, and indifferent that I find. So here are the insides. And some of you are already saying, oh man, it's a damn PCB. I don't want none of that. And to you, I kindly suggest that you grow up. Everything in this price range that's not 30 years old is going to be PCB. If this were hand-wired, it would cost twice as much, justifiably. The question is not whether it's PCB. I mean, this costs $150 more through a small independent brick and mortar store than Sweetwater is selling the 65 reissue deluxe reverb for. So this is meeting a price point. The Fender Deluxe Reverb 65 reissue, non-hand-wired, is meeting a price point. The question is it what do you get for your money? Yes, it's PCB. Is it a good PCB? Is it better than the Fender PCB? Let's take a look and find out. All right, first things first, the filter caps. They are not the traditional Fender filter caps for this model, which would be 16, 16, 16, 16, 8. These are all 22 microfarad. They're all high-quality Initiacons. They're very, very good caps. They're exactly what I would use. The only difference you're going to hear between this and the traditional Fender values is this will have a little less hum rejection and a little more clarity when the amp begins to break up. I'm a little bit puzzled by this one axial electrolytic here. That's the bias supply cap. And I'm thinking it's probably because there are a lot of traces that are going horizontally on both sides of the board. More on that in just a moment. And so it was much easier to do an axial cap here than try to snake a series of vias to go top layer, bottom layer, top layer, bottom layer. So that makes sense to me. The board is a fairly thick, double-sided, through-hole-plated PCB with a good amount of copper, certainly more than enough for the current present in this circuit. The majority of the resistors are either 1-watt carbon films, 1-watt metal oxides, 3-watt metal oxides, or a couple of 3/4-watt metal films where he wanted things to be very stable. I believe these are the grid stoppers and these are the bias leaks. And there's a couple of other little 1/4 watt and 1/2 watts in the tone stack and a few other places. But the vast majority of the resistors in the signal path are all 1 watt and a few 1/2 watt carbon films. All the coupling caps are these Mallory 150Ms, which are very, very good choices. And they're rated properly for the voltages present. I'm going to address the output tube sockets being PCB mounted in a moment, I promise you. I know that's bugging some people. The only real variation I see from the actual Fender circuit other than the filter cap values and some things being much higher quality, are that on the tone circuit in this model, Fender kept the bright cap values the same on each channel and varied the amount of low end rolled off. That had a 10 nanofarad on one channel and a 20 nanofarad on the other. John has 10 nanofarad on both channels, which in my experience is the better sounding amount of high-end roll-off as you turn the knob counterclockwise. I don't know whether he has two different value bright caps, maybe 300 and 500 or 220 and 500, or whether that day in the factory they were out of the orange ones and they popped in a brown one. I could find out if I were to try to bend these over to read them. I don't want to stress the solder joints. Or I could remove all the knobs and pull this out and find out. I'm not going to. It's not that important to me. If I were building one, I would not necessarily use this as a jumping off point. I'm sure John shows things that gave a nice balanced sound. When we play it, we'll find out. But while I am not personally a fan of silver micas, I have no reason to suspect that these are problematic. And they do have a certain sound if you don't have the ones which develop leakage. Other places in the circuit, right here, he's using the same Vichy ceramic discs that I like to use in my own. So this is almost subjective. About 15 years ago now, maybe even more, it's hard to keep track, I had a long series of conversation with John about PCB layout, design principles, and he was helping me to learn Eagle CAD at the time. And one of his big beliefs is that all electrons should flow through curved traces, and you can see the lovely curves everywhere. Now, I have only recently had the software that would allow me to do that. I have not tried it yet because I'd have to have one board built with a series of 45-degree bends and one board built with nothing but curves. And that's, an expensive kind of research. Maybe he's done that. Well, I will say that while I have not noticed any particular benefit to these curves, neither would there be any downside to it. And John has sold a lot more amps than I have. So maybe there's something to it. Either way, it's lovely and does no harm, and it's kind of a signature thing for him. One other thing I want to point out, though, which is pretty cool, these three traces here. It happens other places on the circuit, but here are three great places to show this. This is the grid wire going to pin 7 of this tube. Right next to the trace for this grid wire on this side is a trace that's just going to ground at this end. And over here, another ground trace. And they surround this. So this trace is partially grounded on two sides, and he has nice separation of components within a triode stage throughout the board. So the stuff on this triode has a nice bit of separation, and even the ground trace running between the stuff for this next triode, and that pattern repeats through the amp, and that's something that I've tried to do in my own amps. Like I said in the live chat the other night, when someone like John Suhr takes the time to give you pointers, write it down, memorize it, do as he says, take it seriously. I did, and his advice has served me very well over these years. Much like the Friedman, he has these very small, quick connects, not ribbon cables, but does make assembly easier and less expensive. The little pots that you can't really see, they're 16 millimeter alphas or similar, and they have a bracket. The board's interesting in that it's laid out for the larger bracket like you'd find in a Fender, and for the smaller bracket, which is what he has in this amp. And I guess he did that because he had two different sources that were both good, and depending on parts availability, you could populate these boards with one type or the other. So that's a nice touch. Let's go out to the output tube sockets that people will be whatabouting. All right. The output tube sockets, these are 6V6s, are mounted on a PCB. Now this PCB, it may not be apparent, is separate from the main PCB. It's made at the same time as the main PCB, then it snapped off. and only a very few components and traces and connections are on here. Now, I am not historically a big fan of PCB-mounted output tube sockets. It's okay-ish with EL84s, but it's not my preference. 6V6s are just a little hairier than EL84s. 6L6s, EL34s, that's when traditionally you're asking for trouble. Friedman had EL34s. Board mounted on his. And I asked him about that, and he said he was having no issues, no longevity issues, and he was using an even heavier duty board than this with heavier traces. Unless there's just a rash of Friedmans with bad problems, I'm going to believe him. Now, on John, he would have done the same math. He knows what the current is. He knows what the heat is. So if these fail, I bet you can get this board, pop it in pretty easy. Should John Suhr be hit by a bus or the entire Suhr company slide off into the Pacific because, California, and you had one of these, and say this output tube socket here failed, well, the sockets themselves are the same Beltons that's used for the rectifier, which is hand-wired here. And these are the PCB versions versus the through-hole versions. But I could take this board and these sockets out and mount traditional through-hole sockets here and recreate this wiring like you'd find in a actual 62 Fender. It'd be a very inexpensive repair. So if you must do a PCB output tube socket, this is a good way to do it because any damage would be limited to this very small, easily replaced area and could in fact be replaced with hand-wired things should it be necessary. So while I'm not a fan of the principle, there are always exceptions, and if Friedman and Suhr are doing it without any big warranty issues, and both companies would take care of something like that if it was a design issue. It can be done. It's just not my preference, but then again, I don't have to say my amp cannot cost more than $150 more than whatever Fender has out this year. It's a crazy game, and I'm kind of glad I don't really have to play it. While I have the rectifier tube socket in shot, it's got some diodes before the actual tube rectifier. That just kind of makes life easier for the tube. Current production tubes are not as good as the old ones, and I do this to an awful lot of amps myself. All the primary and secondary connections in the power, on the power transformer are all very neat. Done. The cable management is great. Everything is short. Everything is bundled. Everything is twisted. The IEC is wired to code, of course. It's got proper fuse. Then the power switch. The power switch looks to be a Carling or equivalent. It's high quality. Let me show you something about the jacks. I chose the channel 2 input jacks just as for instance. They're all pretty much the same, the output jacks and the other channel. Good quality. I can't tell if they're Cliff or Neutrik. I believe they're Cliff jacks. 18 or 20 gauge bus wire there. It might be 18 or 16 gauge bus wire. That's 18 or 16 gauge bus wire there for everything, which is going to keep it very solid. It does have twisted wire rather than the shielded wire here for the input connection. And then once it hits the board, as I showed you, it is shielded through those traces. That's because this is a very short path. There's not a lot of gain in this amp, and a twisted setup like this can give the same benefit as shielding. The ones on channel 1 aren't even twisted because they're going a much shorter distance. They'd be connecting here if the jack were in the same location. Now, beneath that, there is a shielded cable coming from the POTS board, and he has done a very nice job of connecting the braid to ground, and then having a very short supported connection for the center conductor. So everything I'm seeing in here is really high quality to cost $150 more than the Fender, especially when you consider that this is made by a much smaller company. Granted, it doesn't have the reverb circuit, so there's a little bit less happening in this than in a deluxe reverb. But This is really, really a good thing as far as I can tell. I look forward to hearing it. Not a lot to see here, which is good. No clutter. You can see everything is got those welded hex standoffs. So this is done very, very well. It's got belt and sockets on all the tubes, belt and shield covers here. It's got the belt and bear traps on all three octals. Got the, I think it says 27 or 24 on each. No, I'm sorry, 42 and 42 or 43. I was reading upside down. It's got the little dampeners, which can be helpful with 6v6s and combos. I think these are Hombre, judging by the code. I don't know for sure, but they look pretty much spot on to the Schumachers that would have been used in the actual 62s. Now, something which bugged me in that live stream the other night, I was talking about building a, sorry, I grabbed the wrong screwdriver, building a tweed fender and whether you could make a new production tweed fender sound like an old one. And I said, Hombre transformers can be important. I was thinking about too many things at once, and obviously the tweed eras tended to have triads. So this one screw wasn't as tight as I would like it. Let's see if there's a nut on the other side. I'm going to check the tightness of the power transformer. Yeah, there's a nylock nut there where I can't really access it on camera, but I'm going to tighten that one up a little bit. That's just a little bit loose. The other one was all the way tight. And let me check the Keps nuts on the power transformer. Now let's see if they're all tight. Can't turn that one. Can't turn that one. Can't turn that one. That one I'd have to move a bunch of wire, but odds are I can't turn that one either. And that's the goal. This one over here, I can turn. I've just got to get some tools and have the chassis up on end to do it. And, much like the handle on the screws on the handle, that's a minor thing. Just wasn't as tight as I would like. So when I give this amp back to the store, it'll be just slightly better than as I found it. But it was certainly not bad as it came in. Let me tighten this up, put this all together, and then we'll get a chance to hear it. For my initial playing, it responds a lot like a real one, say 62, 63 brown panel deluxe. Some things you need to know if you're used to the black and silver panel era. The tone circuit, noon is not flat. Flat is about 1 or 2 o'clock due to the nature of the pot. Above that, it acts as a bright cap, and it will be more effective if the channel volume is low than if it's high. And below that, it begins to roll off highs. And that's something it will do at highest gain, but the bright cap really only takes effect below 1 o'clock on the volume and be more prominent at lower volumes. Now the thing has got a lot of gain, doesn't have a ton of headroom. This is not the same thing at all as the deluxe reverb that more people are familiar with, but it's a cool sound. Let's start with channel 1. Channel 1 is just a little bit darker than channel 2, as they were on the originals. That's why they're labeled normal and bright. That's with volume just above 9 o'clock and treble tone at just about 7. That's channel 2, the bright channel, at the same settings. Let's go back to channel 1 a bit though. The self noise of the amp is almost non-existent unless you have the tone circuits turned way up, in which case you hear just a normal amount of slight white hiss. So that's channel 1, the normal channel. Volume staying, again, right up above 9 o'clock, just barely. And the treble is now turned up to 8, so almost 3 o'clock. And that's a pretty balanced sound. Now, I'm gonna let this ring out. You're gonna hear some feedback. These are unpotted pickups, which can be a little bit problematic in my testing. And I'm sitting here 4 or 5 feet from the amp in a relatively small room. I've got some new pickups ordered that are potted so that I can eliminate some issues. And I don't think it's going to neuter the sound of the guitar. I know there's a big trend these days for all PAF style pickups to be unpotted because the originals were, but most of the guys who were playing the originals once the stages got big and Marshalls came out were stuffing t-shirts into their guitars and stuff. And judicious potting can be a good thing. For my needs, it's kind of crucial, but it is cool because you can do things like this with unpotted. You can hear even at this pretty low volume, it wanted to feed back, which is a problem if I wanted to play in this room at higher volume. But, you know, let's go back to the bright channel. All right, same settings on the channel volume on the bright channel is just above 9 o'clock, and the tone is just below 8, just below 3 o'clock, same as it was on the normal channel. Both for personal curiosity and to maybe make a point, I'm going to grab the SG, which has potted pickups. So as you can hear, the potted pickups get plenty of overtones. They're not exactly dead. They're just not quite as prone to picking up vibrations, which are especially problematic in the semi-hollow body 335. But I'm going to switch back to the 335 for a bit because I'm still in the honeymoon phase with it. And while I love this SG very, very much, I've already found most of its secrets, and I'm still finding things out about the 335. So humor me. All right, I'm going to turn the gain up a little bit. Up to 5, just below noon. You know, that combination of things does not suck. I'm a little still on the fence about the V-type speaker. Let me show you what I'm talking about. It's just on the verge of being a little bit tubby with this speaker. You know, yesterday I was doing that matchless Spitfire and I could not get that lowest octave out of this very small enclosure, or it was just hinted at. In this, with the V-type, it may be a little bit on the verge of too much, and there's a high-end clarity I'm not quite getting. But then again, I'm used to other speakers, and when I've had the 62s, and they typically have had Alnicos, which are very different things. I'm not going to show different speakers with this. It's good to judge the amp as it is. Let me switch to a Strat, which has a very different low-end response than a 335, and maybe that'll tell us some more. Okay, this Strat's got the Mojo Tone Quiet Coil 67s and the Suhr Thornbucker in it. I need to clean the volume pot next to my change strings, but other than that, okay, the issue is not the V-type. The issue is I'm still not making, I'm not on friendly enough terms or know the neck pickup in that 335 well enough yet. It's a little bit on the woofy side. Some more pickup tweaking to follow. I know this Strat well. I trust the Strat well. Has a lot less output, at least for the single coils. So let me turn the amp up a little bit to compensate. Quick note on the playing I do in amp demos. I'm rarely trying to play as in, hey, here's a piece of music, or hey, I'm playing guitar for you guys, wheedly. I'm testing peculiarities of amps and how they respond to certain things. I like that little plucky clucky thing. Or soft, loud, quiet, loud. Now, how quiet can you play and still get a nice sound? And is it still nice if you dig in? How does it take humbuckers well? Doesn't quite have the overtones that I was getting with the hotter pickups. The Thornbucker can hang with the Gibsons, no problem, but I have it a little bit low so it doesn't swamp out the single coils. This is kind of my special all-purpose Swiss Army guitar. And when you first heard the Thornbucker, it was in parallel mode versus series. I bring in some of the neck. All right, from what I'm hearing, the V-type's actually pretty good in this. I think if I owned this amp, I'd be tempted to try a Creamback 65 or an ET65. The Eric Johnson Alnico that Eminence makes is also a fantastic sounding thing. Would probably be a great choice for this, though the wattage would be a little overkill. Maybe the Alessandro would be another interesting thing to try. But no, I think the V-type is holding up pretty well in this. Just a little bit less defined with the neck humbucker. Let me revisit that real fast just to make sure I'm not inventing things. Maybe I'll lower the pickup in this process just to see what's up. The things I do for you guys. I also changed from 10 to 46 to 10 to 52 on this guitar, and I think I'm getting a little more oomph out of those low strings as a result, which is not a bad thing at all. I certainly like the way it feels better, and the guitar resonates more with those strings. Just kind of doing some rough stuff from experience. Fine tuning will follow. Let's see how that's doing. I had turned the tone down a little bit because the Strat's brighter. I turned it up a little bit for this, and I turned the volume down to 4. Actually, that's much closer. That's much closer to what I want. Let me compare with pickups real quick. That's getting there. Some more tweaks off camera will follow, but before I stop, let's turn this up a bit more because we can. All right, we got 7 on the volume now. That ought to do. Nice amp, John. Thanks.